Congressman, it is a great pleasure that I pass it over to you for your remarks.
Hey, good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all of our colleagues from around the world. It's so nice to be with you. It's so nice to be someplace where they pronounce your name properly. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. It's a true story. When I first ran for office, I introduced myself to someone in Chicago, Illinois, which is where I'm from. I said, "Hi, my name is Raja Krishnamurthy." And the person in Chicago looked back at me and said, "Roger Christian Murphy, very nice to meet you." And then he said, "I did not know the Irish made it to India." So in any case, it's so nice to be with you. I want to say a special thank you to Mr. Glenn Lau Key. I'd like to say thank you to Mary Sue Bissell, Shazia Rafi, of course, all of my colleagues from various parliaments and members of Congress from different countries around the world. A happy Earth Day. It's so nice to be with you today, and it's so appropriate that we talk about the environment and how we are going to make a positive difference in our generation in fighting man-made climate change, and how we're going to make this world a more sustainable place to live for all of our people. I'll just touch on a couple things. I'd like to observe those 3 rules of public speaking and Zoom speaking. Be short, be sweet, and be gone. And so I just have a couple points that I want to make. First point is this, which is I'm so pleased that the United States has rejoined the Paris Climate Change Accords, and President Joe Biden deserves tremendous credit for making this, I believe, one of his very first initiatives upon taking office in January. And so with that, we are now rejoining a community of nations who are committed to making sure that the globe fights as one community against an issue of climate change that threatens not only us, but our children and future generations. And so I'm so pleased that today President Biden will be announcing further steps to limit greenhouse emissions from the United States, even more aggressively than what we had anticipated before. And I'm eager to learn more about how we are all going to cooperate together to achieve all of our collective goals. The second point I want to make is here in Congress, I've been working on some very practical measures to try to do our part to combat man-made climate change. I have founded the bipartisan Solar Caucus in Congress. And even under the Trump administration, we made progress in trying to invest in a solar revolution, so to speak, that's taking place not only in the United States, but around the world. And so we successfully invested money in the Department of Energy to lower what are called soft costs associated with installing solar panels. Those are the regulatory and permitting costs that unfortunately are too high. And given our federal system in the United States, we literally have 50 different regimens with regard to the permitting and regulation of solar panels. I apologize for that background noise on my end. That means that our committee hearings are about to begin. So that means I'm about to get the hook. But let me just conclude by saying that you know, all of us in each of our countries can take very practical steps now to combat climate change and to work together in achieving our collective goals. But it starts with action, not just talk, but action. And I think that if each of us do our part and take those baby steps that then become giant leaps toward reducing greenhouse emissions, we are definitely going to achieve our collective targets. So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for allowing me to address you for a couple minutes. Thank you to our conveners, and thank you to all of our colleagues. I just close with my favorite saying, which is that yesterday is history, tomorrow is a mystery, but today is a gift. That's why we call it the present. On this Earth Day, I am blessed to be able to address you, and I'm more blessed to be able to work with you to achieve our collective mission, which is to make the Earth a place where not only we, but future generations are allowed to thrive and flourish and work together for our common humanity. Thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you, Congressman Krishnamurthy, for your insights and perspectives. We hope that we have the opportunity to engage with you further concerning these important policy issues. So we will let you go and do your important work. So thank you very much. Bye-bye. Legislators play a vital role in creating sound policies that advance the interests of their nations and people. Regarding climate change, they can create policies that not only protect our planet's environment, but also advance the economies and environmental standards of all nations as well. Today, we are privileged to hear the perspectives of esteemed parliamentarians on these important policy issues. The US-Asia Institute's mission is to promote greater understanding and strengthen ties between the people and governments of the United States and Asia. We are honored to partner with AirQualityAsia on this critical international forum, especially considering the great focus of the Biden administration and the global community on climate change this month. Though our mission largely focuses on issues related to Asia and engagement with the United States, we understand that the issue of climate change affects all nations. Understanding the significance and scale of this issue not only enables us to effectively engage our partners in Asia and the United States, but our friends in other continents who share our desire to advance understanding between nations and to create a more peaceful, secure, and prosperous world for future generations. Climate change policy interacts with many other policy areas beyond environmental preservation. It affects a nation's healthcare system, food security, water resources, energy systems, and more. Today's summit will help to gather perspectives and solutions to address these issues from those who are developing critical legislation. Through this international engagement, we are facilitating an exchange that helps all of us understand how we can build a better future for the entire world. We hope that everyone listening today will engage with these ideas beyond the summit and facilitate more opportunities for engagement like this to address these issues. Now, I'd like to continue our program, and I would just ask that those observing and participating in this program, if you have questions, please put them in the chat function, and we will do our best to get to them. If we can't get to them, we will try to answer them afterwards. But let me just now pass it along to the Honorable Matthew J. Nolan, the Treasurer of AirQualityAsia, for his introductions. Mr. Nolan was a member of the Irish Parliament for 24 years and retired in 2011. During his parliamentary career, he served as a member of Parliament's Foreign Affairs and European Affairs Committees, Public Accounts Committee, and Whip of the Parliament's Finance Committee. He also served as chair of the Parliament's Joint Committee on Communications, Energy, and Natural Resources, and as chair of the Joint Committee on Sports and Rural Affairs. We are delighted to have Mr. Nolan with us today and look forward to your remarks. Mr. Nolan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Excellencies, honourable members of Parliament, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of AirQualityAsia, I would like to thank you all for taking time in your very busy schedules to discuss the issue of tackling the climate crisis, transitioning to a global green economy. AirQualityAsia is an international parliamentary advocacy group focusing on a breathable future for Asia. Since 2016, AirQualityAsia has been working with high-level policymakers to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and the Paris Agreement by helping governments in Indonesia, India, and Pakistan and other parts of Asia to strengthen national environmental and energy policies. Today, AirQualityAsia is represented at our meeting by myself as Treasurer, Shazia Rafi as President, and board members, the Honourable Mercy Barens, MP, Indonesia, the Honourable Naveed Qamar, MP, Pakistan, the Honourable Sata Yudha Waidya, Senior Advisor to AirQualityAsia. Also with us are AirQualityAsia members, the Honourable Manakishi Lekhi, MP, India, and the Honourable Daya Roro St. Waidya, Indonesia, MP for Indonesia. Climate change accelerated by human activity is firmly recognized as a major global problem and characterized by many as an emergency. Indeed, we heard the United Nations General Secretary during the week talk about standing on the abyss. Environmental pollution, pollution of the air, water, and soil by human activities is the biggest cause of illness and death globally, according to the World Health Organization. Based on our experience in the European Union, concerted action involving national, subnational, and urban agencies is required to ensure that regulatory requirements are actually enforced. Along with regulation, urban layout, transportation, and infrastructural requirements are key factors typically under the control of cities and states themselves. All of these efforts require the availability of adequate human and financial resources, and therefore an appropriate and regular budget allocation. These in turn rely on solid public and political backing for the programme of action. Establishing an effective administration is a gradual and can be a slow process. Therefore, changes in the regulatory regime must be supported with a multi-annual budget and, of course, political support. We hope that our meeting today will contribute to that process. Before moving on, might I just thank our colleagues in the US-Asia Institute, particularly Glenn Liu Key and Mary Sue Bissell, and the Parliamentary Network for their assistance in making today's meeting possible. Now I would like to move on, and I'm going to give the floor to the President of AirQualityAsia, Shasi Rafi. Ms. Rafi is the President and Convener of AirQualityAsia and a consultant specializing in parliamentary diplomacy related to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Ms. Rafi led the Parliamentary Working Group on Clean Air from 2014 to 2016. From 1996 to 2013, Ms. Rafi was Secretary General of the Parliamentarians for Global Action, a non-profit, non-partisan organization of elected legislators from over 130 countries that leverage parliamentary processes to promote peace, international law, gender equality, and reproductive health. The floor is yours, Shazia.
Thank you, MJ. Dorota, please begin with the slide. Honorable members of Parliament, Chair and President, US-Asia Institute, the Parliamentary Network, colleagues from the International Finance Corporation, the World Resources Institute, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning and greetings on this glorious Earth Day from Mannahatta, the land of the Lenape, now known as Manhattan, New York. AirQualityAsia, as you know, is an international parliamentary advocacy group that has been working with high-level policymakers to implement the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030 and the Paris Agreement by helping governments across Asia to strengthen national environment and energy policies. We have all been witnessing this year an unprecedented time with a series of global challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic and exacerbations of climate change. Over 3 million lives have now been lost to COVID-19, over 500,000 in the United States alone. Parallel to this pandemic, however, there is a silent killer that continues to claim lives daily around the world and is also worsening climate change, and that is air pollution. According to the World Health Organization, air pollution now kills almost 9 million people every year. There is also now evidence that COVID-19 pandemic mortality is worsened because of air pollution. Scientists have also suggested that air pollution particles may be acting as vehicles for viral transmission. Allow me to also share the role that you, legislators and parliamentarians, have played in the global agreements on clean air and how AirQualityAsia, working with key partners, fits into this global framework. Air pollution is an accelerator of climate change. The same carbon emissions that speed up global warming make air quality worse. Unlike climate change, which is hard to measure, air quality monitoring allows policymakers like you a real-time progress measure. It is like having your hand on the pulse of the earth. AQA was established in November 2016 to implement the Clean Air UN SDGs 2030. AQA convenes parliamentarians, government officials, UN development agencies, green finance, and civil society experts to that end. In our international work, we have also at the national level worked with 3 pilot countries, India, Indonesia, and Pakistan. I want to take you back a little to 2013. The right to clean air, which is our first human right, it's the first gulp that we take of air when we are born, was proposed at the Inter-Parliamentary Union meeting in November 2013 by the Parliamentary Working Group on Clean Air. Clean air language was then negotiated in the SDGs 2030 by September 2015 with strong targets and signed by all governments. 3 Clean Air SDG 2030 targets are the ones that are the framework of AQA's work, and they are specific, lay out the sources of air pollution and the implementation to be taken by governments. UN agencies, WHO, UNEP are assigned as monitors. Development banks are the affiliated agencies to help fund this implementation. However, the challenge in Asia and particularly in South Asia is enormous. Of the world's cities with the highest air pollution, 18 to 20 out of 20 are in South Asia, about 13 are in India. 3 are in Pakistan, and if you add Bangladesh, Dhaka, and Kathmandu, you're basically talking about ground zero there. In addition to the majority of deaths from respiratory illness, asthma, COPD, air pollution, it also causes 36% of deaths from lung cancer, 34% of stroke deaths, 27% of deaths from heart disease. We also now know that air pollution increases COVID-19 deaths by over 15%. According to the research by the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution, GAP, of which we are a board member, these air pollution deaths have a bell curve. They rise as countries move in the industrialization process from low income to lower middle and upper middle income, and they drop again as they reach high income. Why is that? Because our means of generating energy and means of production remain polluting, and our means of transport, while higher income countries have more access to technology solutions that are green and clean. That differential is now changing rapidly as green energy, green production technologies are spreading across the globe with lower prices than thermal and fossil fuels. This revolution is the true green revolution. Most important for policymakers is how will countries pay for this much needed transition to a clean air economy? Part of that answer lies in transitioning from the current cost air pollution is hitting the current national and global economy. As an example from the World Bank 2016 report, India's air pollution had a 7.8% negative GDP impact. Pakistan's negative impact was 5.8% for the same year, Indonesia 5.6%. Later reports show higher percentages as air pollution levels increased. Applying the 2019 GDP figure for India that year, over $200 billion was leaking out of the Indian economy due to air pollution at the time. Globally, it was 5.3 trillion in 2016. These same funds can be transitioned to a clean air, healthier economy across many tracks. A few years ago, we used to hear from people, oh, it's not possible. It took the US three decades to do that. It's not possible for us to do it so quickly. But we know now that it's possible. Within weeks of the COVID-19 lockdown, air pollution had dropped dramatically across the globe. And in Delhi, for the first time, blue skies had returned. From Jalandhar, you could see the Himachal mountains. Nature restores itself if man's destructive activity can be curtailed. But of course, we can't permanently shut the economy. And as you can see, if policies are not changed, pollution returns. So we must and can build back better. We know from data from California, Europe, Mexico, Chile, China, that air quality improvement policies work. India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and other Asian countries are already on that path with national clean air plans and programs. State and city governments are also following up with state-level plans. But just to give you an idea of how hard this implementation is going to be, because it needs targets, timelines, emission standards for power plants, industry, transport. This is a clear visual of the soot that goes into our lungs, depending on which Euro level fuel is currently allowed on the roads or whether it's electric vehicles. There's no bottle for Euro 6 or for an electric vehicle because that's an empty bottle. So that is where we are all needing to move to. Now, whose job is it to get this implementation of goals and standards and laws that legislators enact in Parliament done? The bulk of the responsibility and the power to implement is with national and state governments working in coordination with city administration. Air has no boundaries, either within nations or across nations. It takes a little over 2 weeks for carbon emissions to get from the east coast of China to the coast of California. Legislators, federal and state, working with their government officials are ideally suited to building this implementation framework within the state, interstate, and globally. Implementation in a democratic system, as you all know as elected legislators in a growing economy, is more challenging. However, your important role as communicators is crucial to convince your constituents, your local industry magnates, your small business owners, and your farmers. Most crucial is your role in transitioning the national budgets towards a clean air economy. One measure are the allocations you make in your national budgets for monitoring and implementation to environment, climate change ministries and agencies. Because we can't stop monitoring even while we begin to ramp up in the right other areas. So for example, in India, in response to rising numbers of motions and questions in Parliament, the Speaker, Honorable Om Birla, held in November 2019, the first official debate on air pollution. Parliament's climate change budget was also supplemented with small air pollution allocations. The budget for new and renewable energy has already been increased by 10%. In Indonesia, the focus has also been on expanding the renewable energy front to help the country double its renewable energy to a target goal of 1/4 of energy generation. In Pakistan, climate change was a new ministry in 2017, whose budget under the current government has rapidly increased with Parliament's support. So thank you for the work that you are doing and for your commitment to our right to clean air.
Thank you. Thank you, Shazia. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Vivek Pathak. Mr. Pathak is the International Finance Corporation's Global Head and Director of Climate Business. In this role, he facilitates business growth, provides through leadership, new product development, and facilitates all work related to climate business. Before IFC, Mr. Pathak worked with the Bank of America and ABN AMRO Bank in new business and risk management. So I hand over to you now, Mr. Pathak.
Is Mr. Pathak there? I don't see his name on the list of, is he signed in?
Okay, if not, then we'll move
the
on.
next speaker, and maybe we will contact him and find out what has happened to his link.
Okay, so can we move on then to
Manish Bapna?
Yeah, so now we will move on then to Mr. Manish Bapna. He's the acting president and CEO of World Resources Institute, a global research organization that works to address the urgent sustainability challenges related to food, forests, water, climate, energy, cities, and the ocean. Before joining WRI in 2007, Mr. Bapna was the executive director of the nonprofit Bank Information Center. He also served as senior economist at the World Bank. So I'll hand over to you now, and thank you for your presentation, Mr. Bapna.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. I'm just going to take one moment to share my screen and see if just wanted to confirm that that worked. You're able to see the slides?
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. So what I would like to talk to all of you today quite briefly is about the opportunity, the once in a generation opportunity about how we build back better, about whether or not the effort to reflate, to recover from this pandemic, which still rages quite deeply and insidiously in some countries around the world, whether the response to that is going to build back a world that both addresses the short-term urgent challenges that countries face today, but does so in a way that also aligns with the climate goals and the sustainable development goals more broadly. So first kind of really important point to note is that this has been unprecedented in scale. The amount of resources that have been programmed in response to the pandemic has been at a scale that we have never seen in the history of humankind. However, it has been highly asymmetric. What this graph shows is that roughly 28% of GDP on average in advanced economies has been spent in terms of recovery stimulus spend. If you look at low-income developing countries, it's about 2%. So highly unfair in terms of the scale of resources that countries have. What we had seen so far is that much of the stimulus spend so far has not had a sustainability or environmental angle to it. Only about 30% of stimulus spend so far has been environmentally relevant. But that percent is increasing as we move from relief to recovery. But what we have seen so far is that most stimulus spending has been reinforcing business as usual infrastructure rather than low carbon, climate smart, resilient, pro-sustainability infrastructure. This is based on some analysis that Vivid Economics has done. But what is quite interesting, this shows whether or not stimulus spend is trending in a positive direction or negative direction when it comes to sustainability. And what you see with the green arrows, more countries are, as they shift from relief to recovery, integrating sustainability elements into their stimulus spend. So this is encouraging. We're nowhere where we need to be, but it is quite encouraging. Just to give one example, in the United States, President Biden has put forward a $2 trillion American jobs plan. It's a stimulus program. A very significant chunk of that, about $1 trillion, would be focused on issues that had a pro-climate, pro-sustainability lens. If that bill becomes passed, it would reflect a very significant shift in the US stimulus spend. Why are countries doing this? Why should they do it more effectively? I want to put forward 4 reasons why this makes sense. The first is jobs. We know jobs are absolutely critical. The loss of jobs has been tragic in countries around the world. What this shows is that for $1 million, you can actually create more jobs in building efficiency, in solar, in urban transport infrastructure than you can in traditional, conventional fossil fuels. So first point, often investing in clean energy will create more jobs per dollar, per euro, per rupee than investing in coal and gas. The second argument is that green spending also tends to be much more powerful in terms of its effect in stimulating economic growth more broadly. This is a very interesting study that the IMF just released last month that shows that the economic multipliers of renewable energy or sustainable land use are 2 to 7 times larger than in fossil fuels or non-eco-friendly land use. So for the finance ministers, for planning ministers, for heads of state that are most concerned about how to reinvigorate economic growth, the IMF is making the argument that actually investing in these issues, investing in sustainability solutions, is economically more dynamic, will result in stronger economic growth. The third point I would make is that clean energy jobs tend to be more inclusive. In a good way, they are able to reach in rural areas, perhaps more widely than large centralized infrastructure projects as we have seen in the 20th century. They also tend to be more accessible for unskilled labor, which is a good thing to reach those that are most often left behind. I would just add that as this continues, we want to make sure that these jobs continue to be well paid, have benefits, and have strong labor standards. But they are able to be more inclusive often than traditional infrastructure jobs. And the fourth and final point is that if we don't make these shifts, that we are likely to not bend the curve on greenhouse gas emissions. We are not going to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. And we all, I think, recognize and appreciate the very significant impacts of unchecked climate change. This just shows you CO2 emissions over the past few years. And what is striking is even though the world shut down over the last 12 months, and we saw a decline in greenhouse or in CO2 emissions here by 6.2%, it's projected to return back to normal this year. So we need to see a structural shift in major economic systems if we are going to tackle the climate and sustainable development challenges. The reason these 4 arguments on jobs, on the economic multiplier for growth, on inclusion, and on reducing climate risk is so important today, why this conversation is so important today. So many countries are debating, deliberating on very important policy and financing packages that will have a very strong impact on the type and quality of growth, the development trajectory model that we take forward after this unbelievably tragic pandemic. This is just an example in the United States, in South Africa, in the EU, with the World Bank, about programs that are all designed as stimulus programs to help reflate economies. The shape, the color of these programs matter dramatically. So thank you very much for this opportunity. It is an incredibly important topic, and parliamentarians, legislators all around the world have such an invaluable role to play to make sure that as we try to reflate the economy, as we try to stimulate growth, we do so in ways that are inclusive and fair. We do so in ways that are green and sustainable. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Bapna. I'm pleased to say that Mr. Pathak has now joined us. So I welcome you, Mr. Pathak, and I welcome you now to make your contribution. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Loden, and thank you so much for having me. I think Mr. Bapna articulated some of the challenges that we're facing very well, and he's always a hard act to follow, but I'll try my best. Picking up from what he said, really, when the stimulus packages came out initially about 15 to 17 months ago, one was getting quite concerned that this is just liquidity going into the market and essentially leading to asset price inflation, which has actually happened. But fortunately, I think as countries have realized that this is a longer term challenge, they have started to focus a lot more on integrating sustainability into these stimulus packages that they're coming out with. I'm not saying that we are there, but I think we are getting there, but clearly a lot more needs to be done. So let me just give you all the perspective from emerging markets, which is what we at IFC cover. When we look at green investment in the current global context, we're struggling to really first and foremost, how do we tackle the pandemic? And in many countries, as we are seeing, we've still not seen the peak. So we've really got a long way to go. And corporates are really focused on how do we stay alive? How do we pay our salaries to our employees? How do we keep our factories running? But I think we've now started to see a lot of them look, and I'll just give some examples. Say the tourism sector, which has been very hard hit, occupancies are at an all-time low. So one thing that we've done is gone to some of these tourism companies and said, we are prepared to give you liquidity support, but over the medium term, you will need to start retrofitting your existing hotels and make them green. So what this we expect, and we are hoping to scale to roll this out on a much, much larger scale. We've done one deal in Thailand, but we're talking to at least 3 or 4 others. So what this will do is it will also create a new sort of new jobs in sectors that today there are no jobs. So specialists who understand green buildings, engineers, staff who can go and check them, auditors. So that entire ecosystem is, I think, what we are looking to develop. And this is a good time. Similarly, extending this more, and I'm focusing a lot on green buildings because that's an area where we think there's going to be a lot of growth going forward. Retail has been hard hit in many countries. Real estate has been hard hit in many countries. So can we really go back to these clients and start asking them to focusing on supporting them with liquidity, which is what they need first and foremost, but then helping them recover in a manner that's green and sustainable. Just by way of example, I think our green buildings tool, we've used it in emerging markets. We've invested almost $5 billion, and we're hoping to scale this up at least 2 to 3 times more in the next 3 to 5 years. But this also requires a lot of support from governments. You need to work with governments, which is what we're doing simultaneously, in terms of ensuring that they can adapt or evolve their standards and make them greener, at least, if nothing else. So an interesting thing that we did in India is we convened the Sustainable Housing Leadership Consortium with the CEOs of the top 5 property developers. So what I'm trying to get across here is that we need the governments, we need DFIs like ourselves, and we need the private sector to make it happen. Another area where I think we are seeing a lot of uptick, and I think it's all over the press now, is entire green finance space. So we're seeing a lot of it in developed countries. It's been a bit slow in terms of commercial banks and funds in emerging markets to pick up. But that's an area that we've been working on at the IFC for the past 5-7 years. And it's been slow, like I said earlier. But the good news is, I think as people are seeing that the pool of capital going towards the green economy is expanding, and the pool of capital going towards what I would call the gray or the brown economy is contracting, I think we're going to see a lot of shift, and we're going to see a lot more financial institutions in emerging markets take on this challenge and start greening their portfolios. So we're working with banks on areas like climate risk, but also helping them understand new sectors that they can look at. And what we are seeing, what is very encouraging to me personally, is that we are seeing banks understanding the fact that not only will they run a lot more risk if they continue with the business as usual approach, but there are a number of new market segments that are opening up. So for them, it's managing risk, but also growing their portfolio in a green and sustainable manner, investing in sectors or lending to sectors which they've not done so in the past. Yeah. So these are two areas I think that we are going to see a lot of interesting examples coming up. And I look forward to working in your support in all these initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution. We now move on, and our next contribution is from the Honourable Satya Yuda Waida, who is a member of the National Energy Council of Indonesia, tasked with designing and formulating the national energy policy. He has served as a former member of the House of Representatives, Vice Chairperson of the Energy Commission, and founding chair of the Green Economy Caucus and the Alternative Energy Caucus. So I'll now call on the Honourable Waida to give us your contribution. Thank you.
Well, well, thank you very much for your introductory remarks. My name is, you can call me Satya, it's much easier than you pronounce the rest of my name. Yeah, well, thank you for giving me an opportunity for tonight, Indonesian time, of course, in the morning, your time, to speak on behalf of the Indonesian National Energy Councils. So this is quite newly established institutions in Indonesia, been 10 years, and was the independent body. The member is proposed by the president and elected by the parliaments. So we are consist of 18 members. So 8 of them are ministers, and the rest are elected by the parliaments. So I like to give you information with regards how far that Indonesia has been successfully implemented the policy that already been set after we ratify the Paris Agreement back in 2015. So I like to share here with my slide of presentation, if you like. So hopefully it works here. Okay, hold on. So can you see it? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So in Indonesia, we are basically committed to at least 2 international commitments. One is the implementation of the SDGs number 7 on the affordable and clean energy, and also SDGs number 13. However, on the other hand, we also ratified the Paris Agreement. So we put a target by 2030 to ensure that universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, increasing the the share of the renewables in the global energy mix. So up to 23% by 2025. And also we trying to reduce our emission to 29% by 2030. So there are 2 big commitments here. To increase the the share of renewables become unavoidable. Yeah. The way we try to do it is through the energy efficiency and also strengthen the international cooperations to facilitate the access to clean energy technology, and also the expand the infrastructure and also to improve the technology. If you look at the timeline here, you know that we are aiming by 2070 is going to be net zero emissions. It's a long way from now, but it is a plan that we are currently working on it. Whether this year is quite achievable or not. as you may know that in 2045, Indonesia has been reached to 100 years of Indonesian independence. So along the way, in 2020, we do what so-called the first nationally determined contributions, part of the Paris agreements, and we are moving toward the net zero emissions in the future. So that is like what I mentioned earlier. The commitment was raised and stated by Indonesian presidents, and as you may know that on the energy sectors, because of the national determined contribution consists of several sectors, including the energy sectors, land use and land use change forestry. And the energy sector itself can contribute around 38% of the emission reduction target. So I like to drill down a little bit on the energy sector rather than the other sectors because of my new role as the member of National Energy Council is very much focused on the energy sectors. So reducing the greenhouse gas emission by around 314 until 398 million tons of CO2 by 2030. And I like to to show to you what happened today, because of if you see from this graph that the energy mix in 2020 is around 11.2%. However, we are aiming to achieve our target is by 25% and 23% by 2025. It is quite a long way to go in terms of the percentage, and also part of the Paris Agreement, part of the national determined contributions, we are targeting 28% in 2030. So that those two numbers that we have to fulfill. If you see in the 2020, we contribute around 64 million ton CO2 emission reductions, even though we're targeting 314 million ton CO2 reduction by 2030. So the effort is to increase the renewables energy generators through the energy efficiency, use biofuel, implementation of biomass, co-firing to the existing of the coal-fired plant, use the electric vehicle, and transition to green fuel and also clean technology. So if you look at from the demand standpoint, we assume that the economic growth up to 2030 is around 5 to 5.5% per year. So those are Indonesian plan and also the realization as per 2020. So if you look at from the national energy management policy, at least there are three things that we're trying to elaborate here. Is one is the energy security, and the other one is national energy independence, and the third is quite important here is the energy sovereignty. And from those three, is actually Indonesia are able to meet with the energy security, because of in energy security there are 4 factors that has to be fulfilled. One is access to the infrastructure, security of supply, affordability, and also the environmentally friendly management. So why that kind of national energy security quite important? Because of the affordability, it has to come at the first place compared with the other requirements. So, the success or not success, the implementation of changing from fossil fuel to the renewables is based on the affordability of the people, where the government trying hard to fill the gap if the affordability has become an issue. So for the national energy independence, it's quite difficult to achieve in Indonesia because we are net oil importer, since 2009. So what we plan to do at the moment is how to fulfill this, to supply from many sources, from either from other country, and also utilize as much as possible our renewables energy. Energy sovereignty is basically driven by our constitution, where the government has a implement what's so-called the ideology in managing the Indonesian natural resources, and where we are not following market economy as as a whole. So that's what's different between Indonesia and any other country in terms of the energy sovereignty. So, and we also changing the paradigms, the way we manage the energy at the moment. In the past, we used the energy as a commodity, but now we're trying to use the energy as a capital for the development, become one engine of growth. So we optimizing the energy utilization through the national economic development, creation of the added value of the country, and also creating the employments. That is become norm of our energy policy at the moment. So if you look at from the consumptions on the gas, we like to end our export of gas, because Indonesia considered of the country who exported gas quite big, since 90s up to now. But we are going to end to export our gas and to fulfill the domestic demand by 2035. And coal, as you may know, that Indonesia is also a coal producer. We are the biggest coal exporters in the world. And if you look at the consumption is around 60% in 2019. So we like to end our export of coal by 2046. That's all those the policy that we like to implement, for now and also in the futures. If you look at from the national energy planning here, that the target for moving from fossil fuel to renewables is not dramatically change the fossil fuel, but basically we still maintain the fossil fuel up to 40. Hold on a second. Oh man. Up to 31% for the renewables, and for gas is 24%. So 55% is basically cleaner energy, even though it's not renewable for all, but we combine between renewables and the natural gas. And here, if look at from the other part of the fossil, it's like coal, we aim to have a 20% of coal and 25% of crude since by 2050. So that is quite different with what the world's tell to to the people to end the fossil fuel by 2030 or 2050 by IEA. So Indonesia has as a different plan, even though we're trying to move to be more cleaner energy than the previous one. I mean, than the target that we are aiming at the 2025. So that is the transitions what we are aiming for the future, by reducing the dirty fossil to become much cleaner, by implementing a lot of technology that we like to do, like gas utilizations compared with the crude oil for the domestic consumptions. So those are our policy in the future. So it means that it reduced the emission quite significantly. So by diversifying the energy sectors and utilization of the technology, and also substitutions of the coal-fired plant with the biomass. To do at the moment to co-firing for coal power plants as much as we can, and also we're trying to substitute using the gasoline to the natural gas, and also with biofuel. From all those strategy that we like to implement, it contribute a lot in the emission reductions in the futures. So this is the scenario that we like to implement, and hopefully that Indonesia could reduce the emission like what we plan in the Paris Agreement, as well as on the Sustainable Development Goal. I think those are my key message, for the Indonesia at the moment. And I like to contribute later on in the question and answer if there is one. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Satya, and thanks for the permission to use the shorter salutation also. Now, moving on, I would like to introduce the Honorable Loren Legarda, Deputy Speaker of the Philippines. Honorary Legarda is Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives of the Philippines.
Just wait a minute until they have cleared the screen from Satya's presentation.
Hold on.
Remove that first.
Yeah. Hold on. Yes, I need to
Share your
stop
screen.
sharing. But yeah. Oh man.
Perhaps like it up. Perfect.
Yeah. Are we okay now?
Yeah.
Yes, we are okay now.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, our next speaker is the Honorable Loren Legarda, Deputy Speaker of the Philippines, Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. Prior to her election to the current position in May 2019, she was a three-term member of the Philippine Senate, where she chaired the committees on finance, foreign relations, and climate change. She has authored many laws aimed at improving the lives of Filipinos and promoting inclusive, sustainable, and resilient development. She is also current United Nations ISDR Global Champion for Resilience, United Nations FCCC National Adaptation Plan Champion, and Commissioner of the Global Commission on Adaptation, and the Climate Vulnerable Forum Ambassador for Parliaments. So, Honourable Legarda, I invite you for your contribution.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening from the Philippines. Ms. Shazia Rafi, thank you very much for this kind invitation on Earth Day. It's been a long, productive, and inspiring day, and I've been learning from all your speeches and looking forward to the forum later on the panel. So warmest greetings as well to my fellow legislators and parliamentarians participating, as well as the US-Asia Institute, of course, AirQualityAsia, and everyone in this webinar today, as we tackle the climate crisis and pushing for the transition to a global green economy. I look forward particularly to the panel discussion later, and I'm honored and happy to share insights and lessons from my own experience in the Philippines, where I've been working on these very important issues in Congress since my first term as senator in 1998. Legislators play an important role in setting the pace and in advancing climate policy, as well as in pushing for sustainable solutions to development problems. In my 3 6-year terms in the Philippine Senate, yes, I started very young. Just to give a quick rundown on the laws we have authored, we were able to legislate important climate and environmental laws: Clean Air Act, Ecological Solid Waste Management Act, the Clean Water Act, Renewable Energy Law, Climate Change Act, and the People's Survival Fund, which is the local adaptation fund in the Philippines. We also enacted the Environmental Education and Awareness Act, the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act, the expanded National Integrated Protected Areas Systems Act, which legislated the protection and preservation of 107 important ecosystems, including open seas, coastal areas, wetlands and tropical forests, critical inner climate adaptation, and biodiversity conservation mechanisms. In my last term as senator, I chaired 3 Senate committees: Foreign Relations, Climate Change, and Finance. And in these capacities, I sponsored our concurrence in the ratification of the Paris Agreement, as well as recommended changes in our government's national budget to enhance adaptation and mitigation provisions in our government's annual budget. And now, as representative in the Lone District of the province of Antique in the House of Representatives, one of the bills we are prioritizing in the House of Representatives is a national ban on single-use plastics. As part of the whole suite of solutions we will need to address this problem, including establishing an extended producer's responsibility, improving waste management, incentivizing consumers, retailers, and manufacturers, exploring alternatives, and raising awareness and changing our behavior. Another bill I filed recently seeks to implement an ecosystem and natural accounting system. The proposed Philippine Ecosystem and Natural Capital Accounting System, or the PENCAS law of 2021. The bill we drafted adheres to the UN system of environmental economic accounting introduced in 2006, in which the UN has been continuously advancing with the adoption of the system of environmental economic accounting, ecosystem accounting, or the CEA, and its collaborative project with other organizations on natural capital accounting and ecosystems valuation ending this year. You know how conventional national income accounting works. Values of goods and services aggregated or produced in a country and formulated into development indicators, GNP, GDP, which then serve as measures of economic performance. Though these indicators are, of course, useful to a certain degree, they don't actually give us the full picture. They don't take into account the consumption benefits of products and amenities provided by the natural environment, waste disposal services, and pollution, which are part of marketed commodities but are not valuated and reflected in income accounting. By accounting for natural capital, policymakers would be able to make more responsive and effective laws because we would be able to get a better sense of both environmental and non-environmental economic inputs. Doing so would allow us to live within our means to avoid biodiversity loss and ecosystems decline and destruction, and pursue sustainable development that will tackle the climate crisis. After all, we cannot protect what we cannot see, what we don't know, and we can't manage what we can't measure. More than that, perhaps on a deeper level, the law hopes to bring about a fundamental shift in how we see the world, how we understand our place in it, and how we value it. It corrects the misconception that we have to choose between the environment and the economy, because it highlights the fact that our economy will only ever be as robust as our natural capital. All of us in this room, in this Zoom today, understand that there is no such dichotomy. It is not one or the other. That, in a nutshell, is what a transition to a global green economy requires. And this goal should not fall by the wayside because of the pandemic. If anything, COVID-19 only makes it even more urgent. After all, the climate crisis and the unabated biodiversity loss only further increase the risk of future further pandemics that would cause even greater damage on our economies and take even more lives if we fail to change the way we act now. This helps illuminate our task as legislators, as policymakers. We must ensure that our efforts to pursue recovery from the pandemic reflect this shift in mindset and in values, that they are attuned to the policies and laws on climate change adaptation and mitigation, that they recognize that the only way for a sustainable recovery is through the climate pathway. My experience as a legislator in the Philippines of more than 20 years offers some insights on what challenges actually lie ahead. I mentioned earlier the laws I authored, and the Philippines is indeed quite a pioneer when it comes to environmental laws, no less than the UNISDR has said that. The challenge has really been in its implementation. As we hold the power of the purse, our work as legislators, as parliamentarians, is to ensure that laws are funded, or even to ensure that our whole national budget is actually a climate budget. Our work is also to exercise strong oversight to ensure that executive agencies efficiently implement our laws. Our work is to ensure that our people actually understand our laws, utilize them, and benefit from them, and that the laws we enact make full use of their everyday knowledge, especially indigenous knowledge for countries who have indigenous peoples. Because like I always say, climate action is always local. We succeed and we fail, depending on how well we do at the level of the local communities, which are at the forefront of the climate crisis and disasters. We would need the help of legislators in developed nations to make the shift to a green economy possible and hopefully permanent. Because the painful truth is, while the Philippines remains an insignificant emitter of greenhouse gases, 1/3 of 1% only, we are among the most affected by climate change, just like our neighbor Indonesia, a country that is at the same time located in the Asia Pacific, as we know, the most vulnerable region in the world. The shift to a green economy is a matter of life or death for us, but we cannot achieve that alone. This is something we hope to talk about more in COP26 in November. The conference should be an opportunity to bring back global focus and regain more momentum in the pursuit of the Paris goals to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The conference has to emphasize the climate crisis as an even bigger threat than COVID-19. We need to make up for the long delays and lost time on our global pace on climate action because of the pandemic. And we hope that COP26 zeroes in on the opportunity to pursue ambitious climate action as we promote sustainable pandemic recovery. In line with this, we hope that COP26 will also emphasize the provision of climate finance, technologies, and capacity development support for developing countries in keeping with the principles of climate justice and our common but differentiated responsibilities and capabilities towards achieving the Paris Agreement's goals. Our nationally determined contribution pledges significant cuts to our greenhouse gas emissions in pursuit of these goals. Our NDC conveys a 75% GHG emission reduction and avoidance by 2030, which is a more ambitious target than our initial NDC or INDC of 70% submitted 5 years ago. Broken down, 72.29% of this, of course, is conditional on the support of climate finance, technologies, and capacity building from developed countries, while 2.71% is unconditional. The target, yes, is quite ambitious. It's also transformational, but it will only be achieved if we're able to pull together different industries, sectors, and communities across the country in pursuit of our goals, and only if we get enough support from developed countries, which have historically cost or contributed the most to the climate crisis. I'm sure that is the case for many more developing countries who are represented ably in this webinar tonight, that are often at the receiving end of frequent, intense disasters and climate shocks, and are very much willing but struggling to do their part. We are now at a very critical crossroad. As fellow legislators in my neighboring countries and eco advocates, environmental warriors, I know we are all preoccupied with helping our own people survive this pandemic. But at the same time, we are also painfully aware that just up ahead is a bigger and perhaps even deadlier threat. Indeed, while we recall 2020 as a year that brought us COVID-19, we're also well aware that it's virtually tied to 2016 as the warmest year on record ever. We have to bring our discussions today to other global and national climate conferences and fora, most especially COP26 in November. We have to lead the shift to a global green economy by pulling together industries, communities, stakeholders, and even governments and countries, nations, knowing what we need is a whole of society, a whole of government, and indeed a whole of planet approach. I look forward not just to hearing your insights and experiences in our discussions tonight, but to working with all of you towards a safer, healthier, greener, and more sustainable world for all of us. I hope that all of us keep safe. We have to stay alive for the sake of our planet. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Honourable Lagarde, for your contribution. Our next speaker is the Honourable Meenakshi Lekhi MP from India. Have we got everyone still? We have, yes. The Honourable Lekhi is a Member of Parliament from New Delhi Parliamentary Constituency. She is also a lawyer in the Supreme Court of India. In 2016, she was appointed as chairperson of the Committee on Privileges of Lok Sabha in Parliament. And in 2019, she was appointed as chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Public Undertakings. Honourable Lekhi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Honourable Moitti and everyone else here on the screen, and those who are connected to us for today's interaction. I've been listening to everyone and also was wondering that since accounting is something which my predecessor discussed about, I think half the time we are dealing with the accounting methodology, and it doesn't serve to keep changing the goalpost as has happened in the past when we discuss Paris Accord and Paris Agreement, and suddenly the conversation changes to zero emissions. And when we are discussing the goals achieved by developing countries and developed countries, the focus is shifted on to some other subject like air pollution. I think end of the day, it doesn't help to change the parameters and the discussion of subjects, because then it amounts to that we are non-serious about our work. And it's coming from someone who is, I mean, I represent 2.5 million people as part of my constituency. India is home to about 1.35 billion people and about 1/6 of humanity. And we are the 5th largest economy currently and growing rapidly. Despite this, India is one of the lowest per capita carbon emission countries amongst G20 at 0.19 tons per capita. And so far as vulnerability to climate change is concerned, and very rightly pointed out by my previous speakers, that we are all together in this game. It's the same thing as COVID has shown, that no country is beyond vulnerability and nobody is more or better placed than other countries. Same goes for climate change. It's not as if typhoon will be localized, the impact will be for everywhere and everyone to see. I speak for India. We are an outlier in the sense that it's not the only country which stuck to its commitment, giving the challenging times to tackle climate change. And we are the only ones who amongst G20 country is on its way to achieving nationally declared commitment under Paris Agreement. And we remained in the top 10 in climate change performance index for the 2nd consecutive year. And the index is released not by my government, but New Climate Institute, which is a German watch and climate action network. And moreover, even as the country was in the midst of strictest lockdowns last year, we transitioned to BS6 standards from April 1st, 2020. Under BS6 standards, there is a reduction of emissions of particulate matter by an average of about 73%. And it has reduced emissions of nitrates and hydrocarbons when compared to older norms. So when it comes to Paris Agreement, we had committed to reduce the emission intensity of GDP by 33% to 35% by 2030, below 2005 levels. And as of 2014, we have already reduced our emission of the GDP by 21%. From renewable energy resources, the consumption of energy, non-fossil fuel sources, as a percentage of total energy installed capacity is 37%, 93% of the target of 2030. And fourth or fifth global position when it comes to wind or solar power deployment, respectively. And capacity installed of renewable has been increasing consistently over the years. So Solar Caucus has something to celebrate. We are an exemplar when it comes to using, and people call it non-renewable energy sources, renewable energy sources, but I call it traditional sources of energy because there can be no greater source of energy than sun, and we are the sun worshippers in the land of where people do not respect either the human right or the animal rights. So when it comes to energy efficiency, decades due to economic growth, we expected certain changes, and according to IEA, India has managed a reduction of 15% of annual energy demand and 300 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions over the period of 2000 to 2018. The amount of energy saved during this year, 2018 and 19, translated into savings of about 89,122 crores, and in terms of US dollars, it's about 1,200 US, 1,236 US dollars for the country. I can go on talking about National Electric Mobility Mission and NAPPC, which is a National Action Plan on Climate Change in 2008 to tackle climate change. And even in agriculture, PM Kusum is a scheme where farmers are incentivized to set up solar panels in their farmland. And by 2022, this scheme is expected to add 25,000 megawatt of solar energy. The government of India has also various schemes from CAMPA, which is National Mission on Afforestation Program on the Namami Gange Basin. So ISA, that is installation of solar energy, CDRI, was announced by the Prime Minister Modi only in 2019, UN Climate Action Summit. And country stands together when it comes to fighting the climate change challenge and transition into green economy, which is so very natural for my country because we respect not just the human lives, but animal lives, plant lives, and water bodies to everything else. And circular economy using less energy and circulating the waste is something we are very good with, and transition into green energy is something which is more or less seamless. But I have 2-3 points to make which are of urgent and immediate need, and I personally am of the opinion this is something we at a platform where discussions should be very open, honest, and clear should be discussed, and especially with respect to China, there has been no comment, and the problem is that a mix of poor with low emitters is wrong, because when we mix up the poor with low emitters, China likes to count itself as a developing country. And when it comes to carbons emission, more than 50%, more than the world average per capita is what is being emitted by China. And South Africa is still above that. So there seems to be an error of understanding and rounding up error in global emissions, which I feel is the cause of wrong calculation. And when we are talking of zero emission, different framework for different countries is what needs to be insisted upon, because we are dealing with countries who are great emitters and who have actually a higher share of emissions as compared to other developing nations. And if I may cite that number, the number is about 42% of the global developed nations are responsible for 78% of the carbon emission. Now, this is an imbalanced viewpoint. And there you have to understand that when you have to pull people out of poverty, and that to a huge population, basic necessities are not luxuries. These are basic necessities that a person does require: a refrigerator, a television, a bare minimum light, electricity, and some electric mobility. How are we going to meet? On one side, we are asking for e-vehicles and insistence upon them. On the other side, fossil fuel countries are the ones where the comparison is going to take place. So I would say that the announcements need to be practical and should take the real historical emissions also into consideration. And we should do everything else which is connected with respect to the green energy emission, and statements which are common but cannot conveniently be ignored, not and especially not just per capita emission, but also historical emissions should be taken into account. And growth in emissions from low emission countries has been less than the failure to reduce high emission by high emission countries. And the change will also happen because when high emission countries reduce when high emission countries engage in a greater reduction of their emission. The focus of decarbonization risk is distracting us from the real need for very low emission countries, access to electricity, for example, and billion of people who lack electricity or quality of supply entirely coal-based electricity. And they consume something like 35 kilowatt per hour per month per home, enough for a fridge, a fan, a TV, and they would only emit about 0.25% of global carbon dioxide emission today. And restrictions based on the incoming fuel amount to putting the cart before the horse. Thus, I feel electricity is something which is easy to decarbonize, especially because the falling renewable energy prices is something we all can work upon and count upon and take it forward with, especially with wind and solar and the amount of work, and even hydro for that matter, the work which India is aggressively pursuing. And second is the push to end coal. So while important because coal is the so-called dirtiest fuel, mask high consumption of other fossil fuels. So whether it's gas or it's petrol or it's other forms of oil, when we focus on decarbonizing through focus on coal, we de-recognize the other factors which end up playing the mischief. And if I don't want to get into the calculation is something that India consumed half of world's average coal in 2019. And since coal has lower carbon as compared to oil and gas, if you calculate, it is not even 1/6 of what the other countries have consumed, and namely oil and gas, whose use isn't anywhere near plateauing globally. So the third announcement of zero are actually net zero, with not just sequestration plans, but relying on offsetting emissions by high emitters against avoided emissions from the low emission countries. Unfortunately, many such plans are also accounting tricks, which I made the statement earlier. And sometimes these are not incremental, and they do not permanently reduce anything. So the fact that developing regions are at a lower point on their emission trajectory should not be taken advantage of by high emitters who will claim carbon dioxide is equal, but the economics is not always equal, and high emitters should move to true zero which is expensive, instead of using up some of the carbon space for developing regions. So the challenge is large enough that developing regions also have to be ambitious. And I think it's not my fault in the first place that climate change has happened historically for historical reasons by high consumers. So focus, if changed to consumption patterns, will alter the sense around meeting out the challenge. And two, accounting justifications or coming from entitlement centric people is something, or entitlement centric nations is something which irks others who are struggling to give just decent level of standard to their people. So under the present situation, I would say COVID-19 has actually added to the pollution, especially using single-use plastic, for example, which has not been counted for. Saying that COVID cleaned the air is only one small aspect, but COVID added plastic waste to the oceans is something which is not been added in the calculation. So whether in terms of cost or in terms of the damage it has caused to the humanity is something which we all need to worry about, because the challenges, the kind of bio warfares we are getting used to. This pandemic has shown us the way forward as to how human greed can change humanity and impact the largest sections of people, and all the countries will get equally impacted. If anyone thinks they are safe from the challenge because they are entitled or they are doing their best, I don't think either the economy or the climate change is going to accept that argument. With these words, I look forward to further cogent interactions and hope and pray for greater cause of humanity through non-stop work at climate change. And in my side of the world, we call it Vasudev Kutumbakam, that the world is one big family. And let's pray for each other's well-being and each other's health and infra to develop, so that people meet the basic necessities. They are able to educate their children. They are able to live well with a decent, dignified life. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Honourable Lecky, for your very thoughtful contribution. We now move on to, I want to introduce the Honourable Cedric Thomas Frolick, who's an MP from South Africa. He is current chair of the House and serves on the committees of Oversight and ICT in the National Assembly of South Africa. He's a member of the Regional Executive Committee of the ANC for the Nelson Mandela region, and also served as a member of the ANC National Executive Committee task team in the Eastern Cape. He represents the South African Parliament on the Interparliamentary Union United Nations Advisory Group. So I'll hand over to you, Honourable Frolick, for your contribution.
Well, good afternoon, facilitator, and also good afternoon to all my colleagues from around the world. I'm wearing my green tie deliberately today because it is Earth Day, and I do so every time once a week, just to remind ourselves of the important role that parliamentarians must play in terms of climate change. I'm greeting you from South Africa, Cape Town, on behalf of the Parliamentary Network. That's a network of legislators that works closely in collaboration with the processes at the World Bank and also at the International Monetary Fund. Now, a number of speakers have referred to the importance of this debate. And I want to highlight, for the few minutes that I have at my disposal, colleagues, the key elements of a green economy, which are a low carbon development, resource efficiency, and social inclusion. I can say with pride today on Earth Day that in my constituency in the Eastern Cape, we've managed to get a multinational, Volkswagen International, operating as Volkswagen South Africa, to play an instrumental role in mitigating against climate change, where they are currently planting thousands of spekbooms. Now in the Eastern Cape and in South Africa, the spekboom is known that when you plant them and they grow, they reduce the carbon emissions that are taking place, and they also absorb the amount of carbon in the atmosphere. So well done to them. The economic model of a green economy recognizes natural capital as a key economic asset and seeks to drastically reduce waste and limit the resources and energy that go into the consumption and production. Furthermore, an inclusive green economy and also recycles food.
और एड्रेस भी मेरे दूसरे फोन पे एसएमएस भेजो.
I think there's a disturbance so in terms of the interpretation on the line. But I want to repeat. I want to repeat the 3 R's. The inclusive green economy: reduce, reuse, and recycle goods. And that's where members of parliament have an important role to play. It invests in renewable energy and public goods that promote communal use and implements policies that internalize and ensure both the equitable use of environmental resources and the promotion of economic activities that preserve biodiversity. Green economic policies and laws that are made by public representatives are vital to transition into economic sectors that ultimately build a resilient economy. These policies and laws include ending fossil fuel subsidies. It's difficult in certain parts of the world, including in ours. Enforcing the polluter pays principle. Supporting green jobs and including green conditionalities in fiscal recovery policies. Now, I've heard various references in terms of the different countries around the world, the economic stimulus packages that is associated with COVID-19. And for us personally, it presents a unique opportunity to promote a green economy. However, most of these packages, Chairperson, are not based on a green model. For instance, a recent survey by Oxford University in April 2020 indicated that only 4% of the G20 COVID-19 fiscal emergency policies were green. Parliamentarians, all of us from all these different countries, and I was so happy to see the parliamentarians and the representatives from the United States participating fully again, being part of the discussions, have the unique opportunity to promote national economy plans that harmonize economic and environmental policies, since these packages require legislative approval. And we are the legislators. Several green approaches are illustrated, and I can refer to, amongst other, green infrastructure, waste management, the circular economy, green energy, green jobs, biodiversity, and nature-based solutions, as well as the rule of law and environmental protection. I just, Chairperson, for the sake of time, want to focus on green infrastructure. This entails parliamentarians and lawmakers, whether they are in Congress, whether they are in legislatures or in the Senate, to focus on the following. Prioritize laws and regulations that require public investment and incentivize private investment in green infrastructure, especially in our cities, in our urban areas, and that is where the majority of the world's greenhouse gas emissions are emitted. To enact legislation to contribute to creating jobs in the green infrastructure and enhancing green infrastructure related business opportunities. And then finally, to provide parliamentary oversight. That is now to go out and to do and to follow the money and to see where these budgets of this green economy is being spent, of the government's work towards the sustainable development goals, such as the provision of the universal access to safe, inclusive, and accessible green and public spaces. I want to stop there, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honourable Frolick. I now move on to our next contributor and speaker is the Honourable Naveed Qamar, Member of Parliament for Pakistan. He is a member of the National Assembly and has served in the legislature since 1988. He has held a number of portfolios in Cabinet, Minister for Petroleum and Natural Resources, Minister for Defence, Minister of Finance and Minister of Privatisation. He also serves on the board of the Parliamentarians for Global Action. Honorary Qamar was co-recipient of the PGA's 18th Annual Defender of Democracy Award in 2013 for his seminal work on the National Multi-Party Cooperation and South Asian Regional Peace Initiative. So I hand over to you now, Honourable Qamar. You are muted.
Thank you very much, MJ. Thank you, Shazia and AQA, as well as our collaborators. Though I think we are going towards the end of the webinar and therefore are getting squeezed for time, but I will still try to put in a little bit of my perspective on the things that have already been talked about. Obviously, at a time when the world is still trying to recover from COVID, and at least in some of our countries, COVID is still the overwhelming issue that is hanging like a cloud over all policies. At this time for President Biden, because of his commitment in the elections to call a global summit and to focus on this hugely important issue, which otherwise somehow we all know about, but tend to ignore because it's not something that's necessarily happening today, but could be happening tomorrow or day after. And therefore this seminar also, because amongst the stakeholders, perhaps some of the most important ones are the legislators who not only make policy, but also serve as a watchdog over policy implementation of the governments wherever they may be, as well as, of course, vote for the budgets that would go to support it. Now, Pakistan is another one of those countries that are hugely affected by the current climate change. We're sitting at the foothill of Himalayas that have always fed this part of the world through the river Indus, which is really the lifeline on which Pakistan, its agriculture, and therefore its livelihood depends on, has with time become increasingly dangerous because we go through years of floods or droughts in a very harsh manner. We could get displaced, like in 2010, we had a flood where the water covered areas larger than the entire UK, for example. And the devastation that left took years to recover from. And yet we are a country which is seen as a water deficient country, and a country that is seen as where we will, over a period of time, run out of water completely. So it's a time that we start managing. The honorable member from India, I think in some ways was referring to this, that we are at the very low end of the net contributors to the carbon emission. For example, Pakistan's total coal-fired energy or electricity generation is well under 5%. And on the other end, while we started out with a lot of furnace oil, all the new plants are being either gas-fired, which is domestically produced, or imported, as well as being complemented with renewable energy, particularly wind and solar. And of course, the mainstay of our electricity generation has always been hydro generation, with large hydro generation, which is now being supplemented with small hydro, also in micro hydro. So all in all, being at the receiving end of this whole thing, when we talk about creating policies, creating domestic policies, which will contribute to a better, especially in terms of overall heat rates in the world. For example, Pakistan is likely to get something like a 3.5 degree increase in its overall average temperatures, particularly in the winters, towards the end of the century, and at least 2 degrees by 2050, which will have a devastating effect on an agriculture country. All of these Pakistan can manage to some extent by switching to renewable energy, by switching, by planting more trees, and there is a huge program for planting trees through this whole country. But ultimately, we as members of the international community have to start looking at things beyond national boundaries.
Naveed, if I could just interrupt you there for 1 minute. We're running somewhat over time, and if I could ask if you could make your concluding remarks. Thank you very much.
Okay, I knew this is going to happen, and that's wanted. Anyways, just some points to make. Some of the issues that I wanted to touch also on was things like air quality measures, because air quality is something which, as was shown by Shazia earlier, this whole South Asian region is amongst the worst affected in terms of air quality. And yet a lot of these pollutants don't stop at national boundaries. So those are again areas where there is a need to have a regional approach and see not only an international approach to these things, but to say how we can in South Asia stop this. Same is with coastal protection and so on. So I guess with the hammer having fallen, I will conclude, but let me say that we are looking forward to what happens as the climate summit, which is happening simultaneously with this seminar, and see what the leaders of who were also the chief polluters, unfortunately, contribute today, and how we can then, based on that, make our own plans in order to make this a safer world for all of us. Thank you.
Naveed, thank you very much for your remarks, and sorry that time has caught up with us. Our next contribution is from the Honourable Mercy Barnens Member of Parliament in Indonesia. She's a member of the Indonesian House of Representatives, chair of the Green Economy Caucus, and a member of the House's Commission on Energy and Mineral Resources, Research and Technology and Environment, as well as the Inter-Parliamentary Coordination Board. Honourable Barnens, I welcome you and look forward to your contribution now.
Thank you, Mr. Noland. Honorable Chairpersons of US-Asia Institute, Madam President of AirQualityAsia, Ms. Sasha Rafi, thank you for this opportunity for me on this webinar. Members of congressmen and members of parliaments around the world, Excellency and distinguished colleagues. First of all, I would like to say thank you for this opportunity to address you to US-Asia Institute and AirQualityAsia, of which I serve as a board member. It is an honor to address this important webinar, which will be a significant step for us to move forward in mitigating the impacts of climate change and preserving the environment while building our country through low carbon development planning, or in another term, green development planning. And maybe Congress for all of us for this Earth Day. Today, we celebrate through this fruitful webinar. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, while the COVID-19 pandemic is still dominated global attentions, climate change as one of the global crises is still a major issue to all around the nation until today. Climate change, however, is a grim reality we are doing to wake up to again tomorrow. And yet it feels like a never-ending homework for all of us to be accomplished for the better future, not for us only, but for the next generation. This is our biggest or greatest legacy for them. To be honest, climate change is transforming our environment, economy, health, and society in diverse ways. It can be detrimental to the weather conditions, for example, and as a result, it could be changes in the frequency of extreme weather events like flood, droughts, and other disasters. For instance, in Indonesia, according to the National Disaster Management Agency, there have been 763 disasters until March 2021. These disasters included 337 floods, 144 landslides, 186 tornadoes, 12 tidal waves and abrasions, 70 forest and land fires, 1 case of droughts, and around 13 earthquakes throughout Indonesia. This situation is part of climate crisis that Indonesia is facing nowadays. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in order to tackling the climate crisis, therefore all countries in the world, including Indonesia, must be responsible and should play a significant role to protect our environment through green policy making. Increase the critical awareness and substantive participation among multi-stakeholders to achieve the eco-social justice in sustainable development process. Certainly as legislator in Commission 7 of House, which concerning a national energy and mineral resources, research and development, and involved in green economy caucus as well, we are still formulating and ensuring that the policy making can fight and mitigate effectively the climate crisis to support the sustainable development itself. As an example, today the renewable energy bill is one of the green legislation product has become a priority list of the national legislation program in our parliament, which submitted by Commission 7 in this year. Therefore, the Commission 7 targets that the renewable energy bill can be completed, discussed with the government by end of this year. In order to achieve the goal, Commission 7 is still consistent and continuously hold active discussion and consultation with various stakeholders, such as private sectors, universities, NGO, journalists, indigenous people, and many others.
to continue to deepen the material and substances that is more comprehensive and to get their various perspectives on issues related to the renewable energy bill. The public consultation process is targeted accomplished in maybe around June 2021. So all of the first level talks are expected to be completed until by end of this year. There are some crucial points that has been discussed of renewable energy bill, such as regulates the utilization and development of renewable energy, regulates the scheme of providing incentives for investment in the clean energy sector, while these incentives will be provided for polluting energy through carbon tax policy. Regulate systems, standard and procedures of the transitions of energy, clean energy from fossil energy to renewable energy. Regulate scheme of renewable energy fund. Regulate dispute settlement system among the related parties. And the last importance, we regulate in this bill related with the capacity building and community participation in renewable energy bill as well. All these points are still being discussed further with experts from various perspectives until now. And we do hope that the presence of renewable energy bill can become a new legal protection to accelerate the development and utilizations of renewable energy gradually and measurably. Provide legal certainty and conducive environment for renewable energy investment. In the national...
Could I just interrupt you there again, please, as we are short on time.
Okay.
If we could move to concluding your remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As the members of Green Economic Caucus come from different parties and commissions, so it gives full advantage for us to play a significant role to influence the green legislation, green budgeting, and green-based oversight through cross-cutting issue and low carbon development. Caucus also gives significant contribution to another bill, such as disaster bill, by including the term of climate disaster into the disaster bill of Commission 7, actively in Commission 4 to ensure the content of natural resources conservation bill, which is currently discussed and could give the huge impact to tackling climate crisis as well. Caucus is still running open public discussion through various approaches, and we do hope that all perspective from extra parliamentary movement of a green perspective can make and produce policy making of climate change eventually to be more inclusively. Until 2020, Indonesia it stood at 11.5% of renewable energy in national energy mix. And we do hope that while the target of achieve the share of renewable energy in the national energy mix is 23% by 2025. This policy combined with Indonesia commitment in NDC of Paris Agreement to reduce emission to 29% with national effort of 41% with global support by 2030. We do hope that it can be a dynamic platform policy of renewable energy and environment technology as well. So, as member of Commission 7 of Parliament, and Green Economic Caucus still keeps moving onward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your contribution, and my apologies again for because we are just running out of time. Our next contributor is the Honourable Senator Nelly Taza. She is Vice Chairperson of the Moroccan Senate, as well as Vice Chairperson of the Moroccan Association of the Private Sector, CGEM. She is a communications specialist who founded A3 Group in 1992 and is founder in 1998 of the emblematic music festival. So the floor is yours, Senator, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, ladies and gentlemen, honorable members of Parliament. It is my pleasure and honor to be invited to be part of this conversation today. And I would like to thank the US-Asia Institute and AirQualityAsia for their invitation, and also the Parliamentary Network on the World Bank and the IMF for giving us opportunities of interaction. I've been a member of this network for a few years since I'm a member of Parliament. It is an honor for me to talk on behalf of my country, Morocco, and also as a representative of the African continent with the Honorable Cedric Froelich. And I will speak for about 5-6 minutes, and I thank you in advance for your listening. To begin, I would like to emphasize on a point that I am first an entrepreneur, as you said in the introduction, and also a senator elected among a group of representatives of the private sector. This is a specificity of our Senate, of our parliament. It's a new experience since we have a new constitution in 2011 after the Arab Spring. So the Senate brings together representatives of the private sector with no affiliation to any political party, with the representatives of the employers and representatives of the territories. So it makes the Senate, it helps consolidate the debates between the economic, the social, and the local partners. So I wanted to point this out because it's a very special experience we're having in this country, and it's interesting to talk about it. And so, as in most countries in the world, the private sector, which I represent in the Senate, is very, very much committed in the subject that brings us together today, tackling the climate change and building a green economy. So I'm pleased to share with you some broad outlines of the Moroccan experience, which is very interesting. First of all, Morocco's environmental policy and strategy in the sector of renewable energies are decided at the highest level of the state. Our King Mohammed VI has a strong and determined vision on this matter, which is good because such an ambition demands long-term policies and cannot be questioned on every election. There has to be a real, true ambition and long-term ambition to go through such a process. So Morocco has become progressively a flagship country on environmental matters and has played an important proactive role in the international climate change debate. So allow me to quote some key dates and events that illustrate the strong vision. First of all, Morocco hosted COP7 in 2001. So that was 20 years ago. Also, we hosted COP22 in 2016. That was 1 year after the Paris agreements. In 2010, we hosted, and I'm glad to say it today, we hosted the celebration of the 40th anniversary of the Global Earth Day, this big event celebrating Earth Day around the world. Yes, that's the time where Morocco, the Kingdom of Morocco, began a national debate about the future of energy, resulting in a fundamental policy redesigning a goal that renewables would produce 42% of the country's power by 2020. So the energy mix would become 42% of the power we use in the country. This target has now been raised to 52% by 2030. In 2011, the new constitution voted by the Moroccan population has given constitutional value to sustainable development. In other words, development in its economic aspect will have to be considered by the states in the broader framework of human and sustainable development, taking into account the environmental aspect at all levels. In 2014, we adopted a framework law, which is a national charter for the environment and sustainable development. I think only 58 countries in the world today have such a framework law. And one of the latest main decisions that have been made in the country that I want to highlight, that highlights the determination of Morocco and to go forward in such a strategy, is the creation of, in the current government, of a ministry dedicated to the green economy. So yes, Morocco aims to decarbonize the economic activity. It has also a national water strategy, a waste management strategy, and it is a well-known country. It is a pioneer country in renewable energies with solid wind and solar investments. We have today 7 solar power plants and 9 wind power plants. We had an ambition to reach a target by 2020 of 6,000 megawatts per hour, and we have reached today 4,000 megawatts. So in terms of legislation, very quickly, I will highlight six main laws we have adopted in our parliament to promote the green economy. In 2010, we adopted the law for the creation of a Moroccan agency for sustainable energy. We voted also a renewable energy law that allows the private sector to invest in renewable energy projects and to sell energy. This is an activity that was until recently an exclusivity of the public sector, and now the private sector can invest in this sector also. We have a law on energy efficiency to support the national strategy and install energy efficiency standards in all sectors of the economy, for example, in the building and construction sector, but also we have introduced import standards, and for example, for the imports of electric vehicles, and we have tax incentives and so on. We have a waste recycling law, and we have a water treatment law, which, for example, requires from industrial companies to install water purification plants in the industries, in the new industries. And the last one I wanted to point out, and Honorable Deputy Speaker Lauren Lagarde talked about it earlier, is that we have a law that bans plastic bags. We did it a few years ago, and we thought the mentalities would never change because we had plastic bags all over the country, everywhere. And we thought that the mentality of the people would never, it was something like a kind of goal that we could hardly reach. But finally, it happened. And what is very interesting is that the government supported all those people that were working either in the formal or informal sector manufacturing plastic bags to convert into the manufacturing of cloth bags. And they created 2,000 jobs. And what is very interesting is that when the COVID crisis happened, we were one of the rare countries that didn't have problems with having masks. And one interesting thing is that these manufacturers that were doing cloth bags had converted their tools to fabric masks, and we now export masks. So it's very interesting to see how this shift from plastic bags to cloth bags has been done and has given the possibility to create jobs and also to convert in something that was definitely needed in all the countries around the world when we had to face the pandemic. So in addition to this, the government has set financing lines through a fund for the environment that subsidizes industrial projects up to 30% of their investment related to the green economy. So Morocco also had the support of the World Bank through the Clean Technology Fund for the development of its solar program, which is a very ambitious program. So not to be too long and to finish, I would say, ladies and gentlemen, that Morocco is a country that is well prepared politically, technically, and as I said, legally for regional cooperation in its efforts to tackle climate change will makes it a potential partner in the region, the Mediterranean region, in Africa, and in Europe. I would like to say that Morocco's green energy exports to Spain makes it a country that exports electricity to the European Union. Morocco has successfully driven down the costs of energy. It is one of the most competitive countries in the world for the production of clean energy, with less than 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So I wish to close by saying that with only 1.15% of the world emissions, Morocco has been ranked 5th country by the MIT Green Future Index 2021. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, Morocco, even if we still have a long way to go, we are getting the job done. And as Mr. John Kerry said, no one nation does this alone. And it is fortunate that the time is back, that we share again the urgency to tackle climate change and to protect our planet through an economic development based on solidarity and responsibility. And I thank you for listening and look forward for more collaboration and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tazi. And before handing over to our final speaker, might I, on my own behalf, thank all the contributors who have made such valued contributions to our webinar today, and to again thank the staff and members of the US-Asia Institute and AirQualityAsia for organizing this event. Our final and concluding speaker today is the Honorable Daya Roro St. Waja Putri, a member of AirQualityAsia and the youngest member of the Indonesian House of Representatives. She is Secretary of the Green Economy Caucus. She is the co-founder of the Indonesian Energy and Environmental Institute. So our final speaker, I hand the floor over to you now, Honorable Putri.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good evening and good morning, considering we are in different parts of the world. My colleagues, honorable fellow members of parliament, senators, ladies and gentlemen, happy Earth Day to everybody. And of course, thank you US-Asia Institute and AirQualityAsia for having me take part in such an important discussion. You know, as mentioned earlier, thank you so much for the introduction. You know, as one of the youngest members of parliament in Indonesia today and this forum, representing a whole generation that really just demands a sustainable future, I'd like to firstly commend on the commitments made by several countries in tackling climate change. So we've heard a lot from different countries today, from the US, Indonesia, Philippines, Pakistan, India, South Africa, and Morocco. And given also that this event is running in parallel to the climate summit hosted by President Biden, and you know, it is being attended by heads of states around the world, including China, which I'm quite surprised about because they've opted out of the Paris Agreement. But the more I see, the more I'm becoming confident that, you know, the political will exists, right, across nations in tackling this global problem. And we've heard today the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions as a way of abiding the Paris Agreement, and of course in creating a sustainable future for all. And that involves improving our air quality as well. And you know, earlier some of you have mentioned the importance of energy transition by optimizing on renewable energy and moving away from fossil fuels. We've also heard about making sure budgets are allocated in realizing the SDGs, to even banning single-use plastics, which I fully support, and I hope our country can effectively do the same, considering that certain cities, including Bali, have enacted this law. And to even ensuring that there is a rise in green public spaces. So really just integrating green urban planning to our cities. We recognize that policies are currently in place, which is the good news, but the most important thing by this point, in my opinion, is to really just act on them, right? To continuously monitor and evaluate how these policies are being implemented. And as a member of Commission 7 of the Indonesian Parliament, alongside my colleague, Mrs. Mercy, we are really just determined in pushing through the renewable bill, right? Renewable energy bill, with the hopes of reaching our 23% target by 2025. And all in all, I truly believe that we all have a very important part to play. We've been entrusted by our constituents. I myself represent 2 million people and a country of 270 million people. And we all respectively each have, you know, our fair share of constituents. And they've entrusted us to fight for what's needed. And I think we should continue in using this power for the greater good of the people. And so with that being said, let's join hands virtually in ensuring that we can achieve our targets together. And I also hope that we can rise above the pandemic that we are currently faced with. Thank you very much.
Thank you all again for your contributions, and may I conclude by wishing you all a happy Earth Day.
Thank you, everybody. Happy Earth Day and Ramadan Mubarak to those who are observing.